So we've got a few APD folks on the line. Get my list pulled up here. Okay, let me get everybody in here. Officer Borton, Detective Perkins, Officer Villareal. Officer Borton, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Detective Perkins?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. And Officer Villareal?
No, I'm here.
Excellent. So y'all have been very patiently waiting backstage while watching all of the conversation today. We've got a few minutes, but I'm interested in hearing kind of your experience on the job and in these areas that we've talked about today: gun violence, mental health, homelessness, substance abuse, family violence. Obviously, these are big topics, and we don't have hours and hours to go into it. But as we think about alternative response, or even making your jobs easier, where you're not spending as many hours on a call, like what kind of experience or information might you add to the conversation today?
If it's okay, I'd like for Chris to start off and then go to Shelly. I know we're short for time, so if I don't talk today, then that's okay with me.
And me, officer. Detective Perkins, why don't you start us off?
How you doing, everybody? My name is Detective Chris Perkins. I've been with the police department for about 21 years now. Thomas asked me to come here kind of from a historical perspective when it deals with crisis intervention. I actually, several mayors ago, was on what was called the Mayor's Mental Health Task Force. I was a full-time CIT officer with the Austin Police Department way back in the early 2000s. I actually trained the majority of the police officers back then, the new ones that were coming in and the folks on the street. I also traveled around the country and taught a few other places. So I've kind of been involved in this for quite some time. I first wanted to talk about a lot of things that Councilman Flanagan had brought up, just how we can make this a little bit easier. I grabbed some data from the police department. Currently, we have about 19% of our calls for service have a mental health component attached to it. When it comes to, I guess, unbundling police services as it relates to the response of mental health calls, I don't think the average police officer would disagree that there are other ways to handle this. But the reality of the situation is, and if we're trying to educate everybody that's listening today, Texas has a pretty rigid state statute when it talks about dealing with those folks in severe crisis. And I said this back in 2002 when I first started. I don't know why we're sending a police officer, but in the state of Texas right now, only a police officer can get someone into a psychiatric facility on an emergency detention without a warrant. The other option is an order of protective custody. And in Travis County, we have one probate judge who deals with that. And that essentially means a psychiatrist has to draw something up, get it to that probate judge. That probate judge has to sign off on it, and then they have to. And when you're dealing with someone who's in severe crisis, who is truly in danger due to their mental health status at that point in time, you don't have those seconds. So to completely unmarry us from the process would take a lot more than I think we could do just on a local level. But I've seen a lot of progress being made in the city with MCOT and with more and more training. Our police officers have continued to train well beyond what I taught back in 2002. And Shelly's going to talk here in a second about the host team. I think there's a lot of good things we could do, but if you're asking from our perspective, would it be beneficial to lower the amount of these type of calls that police officers go to? You're not going to get disagreement from probably anybody in my line of work. But we still have a lot of issues to overcome, and there are certain situations that you just can't remove us from. If someone's actively violent, you just can't remove us from that particular situation as it speaks. But I've been well aware of the Eugene model for a long time, and to see that they respond to more things. I still work quite a bit of overtime on patrol, and I can tell you, we get dispatched all the time to people just sleeping, and it still doesn't make sense to me why a uniformed officer has to go to someone sleeping. It's not against the law to sleep in the city of Austin. It just isn't. I don't know why, but we're dispatched. We have to go. That's just the way things are. If you could come up with a model where where you sent someone out there that could wake them up and then ask those questions. Hey, is there anything that I can do for you? I think that would be good. And if you could keep the average patrol officer from responding to what is essentially 1/5 of the calls, things that are really important to get out in the community, to get to know the neighborhoods. That's something we've got away from because we're so call driven, because we're responding to so many different types of things. So that's just my thoughts on what's going on.
Thank you, Detective. Officer Borton, did you want to add?
Yes, thank you for having me. I agree with Chris 100%. Anything that we can do to improve the mental health system and the way that it's currently being run, I don't think you're going to get anybody in the police department that's going to gripe about that. I do have the pleasure of being on the host team, and Chris mentioned 19% of our calls have a mental health aspect to it. I work, in the downtown and the West Campus area, and I tend to believe it's higher, at least for my daily endeavors. A lot of times we're just out making contacts with homeless individuals, and a mental health issue will come up. It's something that you just can't walk away from. We're dealing with a lot of times when we are involved, we're dealing with people that are truly in crisis, to the point where a citizen is walking by and they're scared. If you've never seen anybody in crisis, it can be a scary thing. And we have people calling 911 just on the surface of what they're observing. They're not even involved. So, we have to respond to those. Sometimes there are severe situations where I can't call MCOT. This person isn't going to go with them willingly. They may not even be to a point where they're a danger to themselves or others, but they're so volatile that you just can't turn them over to a crisis counselor that's arriving in their personal vehicle, and then trying to get that person to go with them isn't realistic. It's not an option sometimes. I've had to take people in on a police officer's commitment during the course of a day. You take them to Yellow Pod at Del Seaton, and before the end of my day, by the time my day's coming to an end, I see that person walking down the street. I've taken them there because they've become a danger to themselves or somebody else, yet they've walked away from the hospital. And for me, that's frustrating. And I know it's frustrating for other officers. A lot of times, being a part of host, we have the ability to go into the hospital. We have the time and the commitment to that person to go in and advocate for them. And then we can kind of push for something more to happen. But a lot of times these people just get lost in the shuffle of being at a hospital. And that's unfortunate. So anything that anybody can do to improve the well-being of these people that are exposed out there. They're on the streets. They're not in a house or have family members that are looking out for them. They're out there with a mental illness, and they're on the streets. And it's a devastating thing to watch. So anything that can be done to improve that, I think any officer within our department is going to applaud it.
Well, thank you. And I want to we're just a few minutes over our scheduled time. I think we can fudge our time a little bit. But I just wanted to thank y'all again for continuing to participate in the workshops. Again, with all of our community experts that joined us this time around, we're mixing up the format every time. Every issue is going to take a different approach. I think that's the watch phrase for literally everything we're talking about. We need a much more nuanced approach to all this stuff, and important for the public to know that we're doing this work as a community, and nobody's I don't think it's fair to say that there's some absolute answer to every question. This is hard stuff, and if we're talking about a thing that you do 50% one way and 50% another way now, if we can tweak that up to 80-20, you've saved money, you've targeted your response, you haven't eliminated entirely, because there are just some things that happen. You got to be prepared for some things that happen. But sometimes I think we send the wrong tool to the wrong problem, and y'all end up being the tool for every problem, and that's the challenge we got to address. Any last questions, Councilmember Kitchen? Hold on. There you go.
Okay, Officer Borton, perhaps we can talk about this offline, but because I don't want to take too much time, but I would really like to understand what improvements you think would be helpful for the host team I have a great respect for what you all do with host, and whether it's additional host teams, which is one thing that I've looked at for a while, or whether it's something else, I would love to know what that is. And one thing you just pointed to is, which is the fact that I think something that Councilmember Harper Madison asked about earlier, you have to have some place to take people to. So, so anyway, I'm just opening up that conversation for later, and I'll follow up with you. I'd like to understand what specifically your thoughts might be that we could help.
Yeah, I think our team would love to meet with you and talk about it.
Okay.
Officer Villareal, would you like to add something?
Yes, sir. I just want to thank you again for including us. I'll echo just real quickly what Shelly and Chris have said. You know, there's not going to be any pushback from the police association on trying to find better way to handle some of these calls. You know, Mrs. Santana from Survive to Thrive made a comment about, you know, having additional training. We're never gonna take the position that our officers have enough training. We can always use more training. We recognize we could always be better in our service to the folks that we serve. And you know, sitting here today, I'll tell you guys, I for a long time have strongly believed that, you know, the legislative aspect to part of the problem that we have in the state of Texas, it needs to take a collaboration between management and labor. We need to be on the same page when we go to the ledge to figure this out. I mean, this is obviously it's a bigger issue than just the city of Austin issue, but we should be on the same page as we go to the ledge to as a state reimagine what it means to serve the people in mental health crisis. So that's my commitment to you guys today, and I greatly appreciate y'all's willingness to continue to engage us in these conversations.
Thank you, officer. We definitely have to look at the whole system top to bottom. There are changes. There are jobs the state needs to do, like child protective services, that they fail at, or foster care systems that they fail at. Certainly, state laws that require assistant officers, they don't have to be officers. It's on our list too. Councilmember Tovo, are you on the line now?
Yeah, I'm on the line.
Go ahead.
Are you able to hear me? Yeah,
Yes.
I've been on the line the whole time. I think I was just unable to be unmuted. Thank you, Detective Borton, for really all of your work getting host up and running. You've just been such a vital part of that. In June, we had a conversation about expanding host teams, and I wondered if you could address how important you feel it is that there be a police officer as part of the host team. You know, the conversation we talked about just very, very briefly in early June, just addressing the possibility of having host teams that did not include. So if you could talk through really what the officers' roles are within that host team and just respond to that question.
Yes, ma'am. I can only speak for myself. I was kind of handpicked for this position. I've worked downtown for 12 years, and I had a pretty good knowledge base of a lot of the homeless people downtown. So I think an officer being on the team is good for a variety of, obviously, safety reasons, but also it really comes down to your relationship with a lot of these people. I've known a lot of them for such a long time that they'll ask for me. Especially now that I'm in this role, they know that I'm in a different position to where if they need something, they can ask for me. I get calls from the day shift officers all the time, whether it's for clothing or for help with their medications being lost. So it works. It works for this team that we have because we have such an intimate knowledge of our people. And I think that goes for myself and the other officer and our medic. We have a relationship with these people. So as long as an officer that maybe works south has a relationship with the community and has a trusted role, I think having a police officer on the team is a great idea, because you have so many police officers out there, and they're just one click of the radio, they can get me, or they can get help, or they can get, somebody might need clothes. So as long as you have somebody that's willing to do it and has, a knowledge base of the people, I think it's really a vital part of the team.
Thank you, Officer Borton, Detective Perkins, Officer Villareal. We're 10 minutes past. I want to allow committee members to make any final comments if they wish. Councilmember Kassar.
Well, I'd like to thank all the panelists and thank you to the officers for participating, and appreciate that you shouldn't be thrown at as the city's response to every challenge out there. And I just think that this was a really good session. I appreciate everybody coming together on this. There's been some conversation about whether the council cares about violence that occurs in our city, and it couldn't be further from the truth that we don't care about violence. This whole session has been about how do we prevent harm and prevent violence and interrupt violence and reduce harm in our community. But as we heard in the first presentation, while people that commit gun violence should be held accountable, that accountability process does not necessarily prevent gun violence. And in fact, gun violence is a contagion, and so often someone that survives gun violence is oftentimes a person that might commit it. And so us finding ways to intervene in that, I think, is something really important we heard today. Obviously, you can't arrest your way out of substance use problems, and you can't arrest your way out of homelessness. And so I think the conversation about how do we actually go in and treat those issues is really important. And of course, as we know, the largest chunk of violent crime in our community is family violence. And you can patrol a street all you want. That does not prevent the family violence that's going on inside of our own homes. And the fact that we have fewer shelter beds at SAFE, for example, today than 15 years ago just isn't acceptable. So I think that this year we have a really important opportunity to invest in ways that will actually reduce the amount of harm in our community in a substantive way, in a way that we haven't before. I mean, many of the programs that were presented to us today exist in other cities and just don't exist here. So if we can respond to mental health calls with mental health professionals, if we can house folks experiencing homelessness, treat people with substance use challenges, and prevent gun violence before it even occurs in the first place, I think that would be a really meaningful investment in public safety. And I think that that's what the council is looking to do.
Thank you, Councilmember Kassar. Councilmember Tovo, are you still on the line?
Yeah, and again, I've been on the line the whole time. I just got bumped off the computer and just
Gotcha.
listening.
Go ahead.
And so I apologize for being a disembodied voice. There was a conversation earlier about the sobering center, and I absolutely recognize and applaud the effort to get more work on outreach. But I did want to just make the point that exists in many areas. Number one, I want to say the sobering center is 1.5 years old, so it's still very early. It has had a change in leadership that has changed by necessity, changed its focus a bit to hiring that next leader, and we have a wonderful one in Laura Sovine on board. But there are multiple areas where there needs to be more outreach, including with UT, with EMS, with APD, but I didn't want it to be out there and said that the police or any other entity is not bringing individuals to the sobering center. We are, and we've had terrific participation on our board from Assistant Chief Chacon. But are there opportunities to expand that? Absolutely, and we really need the community to assist in that. So especially because we're at a point where we want the community to invest their dollars in the sobering center as well. I wanted them to know that it has been a success. We have to expand, absolutely, and I welcome both the panelists' ideas about how to do that as well as
Thank you, Councilmember Tovo. I think the Sobering Center is a great example of that suite of alternative solutions to other problems. Councilmember Kitchen. Hold on. Go ahead.
Just quickly, I would just say that thank you very much for this. This has been very enlightening and helpful to hear all this. I think that As a community, we've invested in a number of programs already, like the host team and the mental health diversion team that we started last year. What we're learning is there is much more that needs to be done in all of these areas. We can learn from other communities, and we can continue to invest in what we've already started, and invest in a much bigger way. And then we also need to understand that in addition to investing in these programs like HOST and the mental health diversion and sobering center and others, as Councilmember Tovo mentioned, we need to work with the community as a whole, because there's more to this system than what the city of Austin's piece. So.
Thank you, Councilmember. Any other final comments? Well, thanks again to all of our panelists, to our officers who are here with us, stuck with us through all the way to the end. A lot of really great work, a lot of great ideas. And again, for the public, this process today is not going to answer finally all those questions, but help ensure that this work moves forward at a deliberate pace, and that all of the relevant experts and folks who do the work now and the desires of the public are considered as we go through this work. As Councilmember Kassar said, the budget, the manager's initial budget comes out next week. It will almost certainly not have all of the amazing things that we're talking about here today, because it takes time to build a budget. And even if we were to decide tomorrow to stand up a whole other agency focused on mental health, it still takes time to recruit and train and launch and do all the logistics and all the things. So, I'm hearing some good stuff on the advocate side of the community, where they're talking about goals over a couple of years. I think that's the right direction for us to be headed, because that gives us time to ensure that we get these solutions right. We would hate to stand up things too quickly or too inefficiently, and then they don't work, and then we're back to where we started. So I think there's a lot of good work going on. And again, Thomas, thank you for joining us. And I hope that the Police Association continues to engage in productive conversations, because I think we're all trying to do right by our community and make sure that we're protecting the public and doing everything that we can. So thanks, everybody. It is 4:17 p.m. and I adjourn this meeting of the Public Safety Committee.